What if the person responsible for finding Nancy Guthrie was the one supporting the kidnapper? What if the man who stood in front of cameras gave press conference after press conference and told the American public he was doing everything possible? What if that same man had been suspended 8 separate times as a police officer? What if he had beaten a handcuffed man almost to death with a flashlight? What if he had lied about all of it on his resume for 4 decades? When the FBI Director of the United States offered him everything, hundreds of agents, a laboratory at Quantico, a plane sitting on the runway ready to go, this man said no. Not because he had a better plan, but because he supports the kidnapper and his ego. Because of a grudge that goes back 10 years. Because the only thing bigger than his ambition is his contempt for the truth. Today, you are going to learn things about Sheriff Chris Nanos of Pima County, Arizona, that most news organizations have been too careful to say plainly. We are not careful here. This is Brian Records. This channel was built for one purpose: to say what others will not say. To put the verified facts in front of you and let you judge for yourself. We do not protect powerful people. We do not soften what needs to be said. And before we go any further, I want to address something. Many of you in our previous videos asked us to provide sources. You asked where we get our information. That is a fair and smart question, and we respect you for asking it. Starting with this video, every single fact, every quote, every document we reference, the links are in the description box below. No paywalls, no tricks. Check everything we say for yourself. That is the standard this channel holds itself to. Now, let us talk about this sheriff, because people across this country are furious, and they have every right to be. On April 18th, 2026, a verified Twitter user named Terry Mueller posted publicly about Sheriff Nanos and the Pima County Sheriff's Department. His post said that from the sheriff to the media team, all need removal. That Pima County deserves better than these people. That the whole situation has been a disaster. That is one voice. But Terry Mueller is not alone. Thousands of Americans have said similar things. They have said Nanos needs to go. They have called the investigation a failure. They have asked publicly on X.com why this man still has a badge. And now, after everything that has come out, the question is no longer whether Chris Nanos failed Nancy Guthrie. The question is whether he did it on purpose. Let us start with who Nancy Guthrie is, because she is the reason every single word in this video matters. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized journalists in America, a co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC. Nancy lives alone in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood on the east side of Tucson, Arizona. It is a quiet, affluent neighborhood, the kind of place where people feel safe. On the night of January 31st, 2026, Nancy returned home at approximately 9:50 p.m. Her garage door closed behind her. The night appeared normal, but something happened inside that home in the hours that followed. At 1:47 a.m., her front door camera stopped transmitting. At 2:12 a.m., motion was detected on the property. At 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker stopped syncing data. Those 3 timestamps define a 41-minute window. That window is the heart of this entire investigation. Whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie, the evidence says it happened inside those 41 minutes. And what greeted this investigation from the very first hour set the stage for everything that followed. According to a source close to the investigation, who spoke to Brian Entin of News Nation, the very first responders to Nancy Guthrie's home were not experienced homicide detectives. The source said that the supervisor who initially led the response had never investigated a homicide before being placed in charge of the homicide unit. Never investigated a homicide. And this source told Brian Enton exactly why that happened. Quote, "You have decisions made by people that will install friends and people that can do stuff for them, opposed to people that are there on their merit and can do the job correctly." End quote. Chris Nanos put a loyal friend in charge of homicide, not the most qualified person, a friend. And that friend showed up to what would become one of the most watched missing persons cases in American history without the experience to handle it. The source continued. They told Brian Enton that there was an immediate rush to judgment, that Nancy had simply wandered off, that the investigation was run as a search and rescue operation instead of a potential criminal case, that detectives returned to the home not once but multiple times, which tells you clearly that critical evidence was not properly collected on the first visit. Every hour that passed with the wrong focus was an hour that a kidnapper used to get further away. Now let us talk about what happened with the FBI, because this is where things go from bad to something that should make every law-abiding American genuinely angry. On Sean Hannity's podcast in May of 2026, Kash Patel, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, spoke about the Nancy Guthrie case on the record. Patel said this, quote, "The first 48 hours of anyone's disappearance are the most critical, and for 4 days we were kept out of the investigation." End quote. 4 days. The director of the FBI said his agency was kept out for 4 days. He said he launched hundreds of agents and intelligence staff to Phoenix and Tucson specifically for this case. He said he had a fixed-wing aircraft sitting on the ground, ready to fly DNA evidence to the Quantico laboratory in Virginia, which he described as the best lab in the world. And he said they were told no. The DNA was sent instead to a private laboratory in Florida, a lab the Pima County Sheriff's Office had used for 30 or 40 years. Patel said, and these are his exact words, "We would have analyzed it within days and maybe gotten better information or more information. Our lab is just better than any other private lab out there. And we didn't get a chance to do that. We didn't get a chance." Now, to be fair, Sergeant Aaron Cross, the president of the Pima County Sheriff's Deputies Union and a current sergeant inside the department, told Brian Enton in May of 2026 that by the time the FBI was fully brought in, the DNA had already been shipped to Florida. He said the truth is probably somewhere between what Patel said and what Nanos said. And DNA genealogy expert C.C. Moore, one of the most respected names in forensic science, has said that some private labs do have capabilities comparable to Quantico. But here is the question that has never been properly answered. If the private lab in Florida was just as good as the FBI lab at Quantico, why refuse a plane that was already on the ground? Why turn down hundreds of federal agents who were ready, willing, and on standby? Sergeant Cross answered that question. He told Brian Enton directly and clearly that the answer is a grudge, a 10-year-old grudge. In 2016, the FBI conducted a RICO investigation into the Pima County Sheriff's Office. It was an investigation into the misuse of funds. One of the department chiefs was indicted. A second chief died by suicide. Chris Nanos, who was interim sheriff at the time, was implicated. He was not ultimately charged, but the investigation damaged him. Sergeant Cross told Brian Enton there is a video from that time, documented by local Tucson station KGUN 9, in which Nanos speaks about the FBI with open contempt on his face. Cross said Nanos referred to his own detectives as the real police, that you could hear the dismissive tone in his voice. Cross told Brian Entin, in his opinion, and in the opinion of nearly every person he spoke to inside the department, Nanos never forgave the FBI for that 2016 investigation, and he believes that resentment shaped every decision Nanos made in the first days and weeks after Nancy Guthrie vanished. Let me be direct with you. If the evidence supports what Sergeant Cross is saying, then Chris Nanos looked at a situation where an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker was missing and made decisions based on a personal grudge. Not based on what was best for Nancy, based on what was best for his ego. And the investigation suffered for it. Sergeant Cross went further. He told Brian Entin that once the surveillance image of the perpetrator was publicly released, that was the moment, in his professional opinion, when the case should have been fully handed over to the FBI. That the FBI had hundreds of agents ready. That the Pima County Sheriff's Office has 96 detectives total, not hundreds, 96. And he said bluntly that the FBI's ability to track and manage an investigation of this scale far exceeded what the Sheriff's Department could provide. And when Brian Entin asked Sergeant Cross directly, would the sheriff ever voluntarily hand the case to the FBI, Cross said, no. Never. He said the size of this man's ego is difficult to describe. Let us talk about what was happening inside the department during that first week. Because the picture that emerges is not just troubling, it is infuriating. Sergeant Cross told Brian Entin that the investigation in the first week after Nancy disappeared was, and I am going to use his exact word, a mess, an organizational disaster. He said detectives were being sent out to interview witnesses only to discover those witnesses had already been spoken to 4 or 5 times by other teams. Nobody was tracking who had been where. Nobody was maintaining proper records. Units within the same department were not sharing information with each other. Think about that. Separate units of the same sheriff's department were not talking to each other. And if they were not communicating internally, what chance did the FBI have? Cross told Brian Entin that the FBI agents on the ground almost certainly felt they were being deliberately shut out. He said their perception was probably that they were being blocked. But the reality, in his view, was even more disturbing. The chaos was not organized obstruction. It was incompetence at the leadership level. Pure, inexcusable leadership failure. A source inside the department, speaking to Brian Entin under protected anonymity to avoid retaliation, put it this way, quote, "He ruined a great department," end quote. A great department, ruined by one man. This same source told Brian Entin the morale inside the Pima County Sheriff's Office is at the lowest it has ever been, that people are walking on eggshells, that deputies are embarrassed. And then came the no confidence vote. Every single deputy in the Pima County Sheriff's Deputies Union voted that they have no confidence in Sheriff Chris Nanos. 100%. Not one deputy who voted had confidence in their own sheriff. Sergeant Cross told Brian Entin this was not the first time the union had done this. But with the eyes of the entire country on Pima County, the message was impossible to ignore. The nation now knows that the people who work for Chris Nanos every single day do not trust him. But even that is not the most important part of this story. Because all of this, the chaos, the ego, the grudge against the FBI, the mismanaged investigation, all of it takes on a completely different meaning when you learn who Chris Nanos really is. Who he was before he ever put on a badge in Arizona. What he did in El Paso, Texas. And what he has been hiding for 4 decades. We need to go back to 1976. Chris Nanos joins the El Paso Police Department. He is going to be a lawman. He builds his identity around that idea. He presents himself to the world as a career law enforcement professional. But here is what the public records show. Between 1979 and 1982, Chris Nanos was suspended 8 separate times by the El Paso Police Department. 8 times in 3 years. Let me walk you through what those suspensions were for. Because this is not a list of paperwork errors or scheduling issues. First suspension, violating department orders. Second suspension, making off-duty threats. Third suspension, illegal gambling while off-duty. Fourth suspension. This is the one that should stop you cold. Pima County Supervisor Dr. Matt Hines, speaking publicly on the News Nation program Elizabeth Vargas Reports in April of 2026, stated that Nanos beat a handcuffed man almost to death with a flashlight. That man was sent to the intensive care unit. A handcuffed man, already in custody, could not defend himself, and Chris Nanos beat him with a flashlight until he was in the ICU. Fifth suspension, habitual tardiness. He could not even show up on time. Sixth suspension, insubordination. Seventh and eighth suspensions, additional violations. In total, 37 days without pay across those 3 years. And in 1982, the El Paso Police Department gave him a choice: resign or be terminated. He resigned. Fox News reported in March of 2026, citing Arizona public records obtained through a public records request, that Nanos resigned in lieu of termination from the El Paso Police Department and did not properly disclose this on his subsequent employment applications in Arizona. He hid it. He buried the suspensions. He buried the resignation under threat of termination. He built a law enforcement career in Arizona on a foundation of silence about what he had done in Texas for 4 decades. And then, on December 11th, 2025, in a deposition in a lawsuit filed by Sergeant Aaron Cross, the president of his own deputies union, a lawyer asked Chris Nanos a direct question under oath. Have you ever been suspended as a law enforcement officer? Chris Nanos said no. No. 8 suspensions, 37 days without pay, a man beaten nearly to death in an ICU, forced resignation in lieu of termination, and he looked that lawyer in the eye and said no. AZ Central reported in March of 2026, citing official El Paso Police Department records and the deposition transcript, that Nanos denied under oath that he had ever been suspended, while public records directly contradict that claim. CBS News reported in May of 2026 that local officials are alleging Nanos lied under oath during this deposition. The Hollywood Reporter reported that Nanos is accused of hiding his disciplinary past in sworn proceedings. This is not rumor. This is not speculation. This is what the documents say. Now, I want you to connect 2 things. A man who lied under oath about being suspended is the same man who told the American public he was doing everything possible to find Nancy Guthrie. A man who beat a handcuffed person with a flashlight is the same man whose detectives were responsible for preserving evidence at the scene where Nancy was taken. A man who was forced out of El Paso under threat of termination is the same man who stood before cameras and called himself the lead investigator on the most watched missing persons case in America. Do you see what I mean? The lies did not start in December 2025. The lies are a pattern. They go back 40 years. And the Pima County Board of Supervisors now sees it clearly. Pima County Supervisor Dr. Matt Hines, a Democrat, went public with some of the strongest language any elected official has used in this entire case. He told reporters in May of 2026, "This is accountability for a guy who has evaded accountability for decades and is himself a public safety threat." A public safety threat. An elected county official called the sheriff a public safety threat. And Steve Christie, the only Republican on the 5-person Board of Supervisors, told Fox News that he planned to move to vacate Nanos from office, citing Nanos' failure to comply with the board's demands and his alleged lies. Both sides, Democrat and Republican, both saying he has to go. The Board of Supervisors had given Nanos a list of 10 specific demands. They required him to appear personally before them under oath to answer questions. They gave him a deadline. They expected him to show up. He sent a lawyer with a letter. Not him, a lawyer. And when that letter was reviewed, Supervisor Christie told Fox News it contained things that were materially not true and provably not true. Not accurate, provably not true. Sergeant Aaron Cross told Brian Entin what happened next. The Deputies Union sent an official letter to the Board of Supervisors requesting that the matter of Nanos' sworn statements be referred to the Arizona Attorney General for a felony perjury investigation. A felony. The Deputies Union, the people who work with Nanos every single day, asked for their own boss to be investigated for a felony. Cross explained to Brian Entin that in the state of Arizona, when someone swears to something that is provably false, that is perjury. That is a felony. And once Nanos filed an affidavit swearing to the contents of his lawyer's letter, which itself contained things that were materially untrue, he created serious legal exposure for himself. Cross said to Brian Entin, and I want you to hear these words clearly. The whole situation is bizarre, because when we found out from his El Paso background, he shouldn't even have been a cop in Arizona ever in the first place. He is in a position that's unique because if he were any other position inside the department, he'd be fired for lying about his background, for the content in his background. End quote. He should not have been a cop in Arizona, ever, in the first place. Those are the words of the president of the Deputies Union, a man who has worked inside that department, who knows how law enforcement hiring is supposed to work, who knows exactly what disqualifies a person from wearing a badge. And what did the Board of Supervisors do when Nanos missed his deadline? 2 members invoked an 1873 Arizona territorial law and filed a motion to vacate his office entirely, not ask for his resignation, vacate his office, remove him. NY Post reported on May 7, 2026, that Sheriff Nanos could lose his job in a matter of days. In a matter of days. And there is one more thing about this man's conduct that the mainstream media mentioned briefly and then moved past. On November 6, 2024, Sheriff Chris Nanos went through security at Tucson International Airport. TSA found a loaded gun in his carry-on bag. A loaded gun. Carry-on. Airport security. This is the man running the law enforcement agency responsible for finding Nancy Guthrie. And while we are talking about his judgment outside the investigation, Let us also talk about the basketball game. On February 8th, 2026, while Nancy Guthrie was missing, while her family was praying for answers, while the investigation that his own department would later describe as a mess was unfolding, Sheriff Nanos attended an Arizona Wildcats basketball game. Ted Williams, a former homicide investigator and legal analyst, told reporters this directly. For him to be at a basketball game during the most significant case of his career, I believe it is a disgrace. A disgrace. That word is exactly right. Now, I want to bring this story to where it stands today, because it is still moving, and not in the direction Nanos hoped. The joint task force that now includes FBI agents working alongside Pima County detectives is still active. Sergeant Cross told Brian Entin that 4 or 5 detectives and a sergeant have been physically moved to work out of the FBI building in Tucson. This is a positive development, Cross said, because it gets the investigators out from under the constant interference of command staff and allows them to follow the case where it leads. But Cross was also honest with Brian Entin about where the case stands. He said there has been no real buzz inside the department about any major new break. He said investigators are going through thousands of tips. He said the case is not cold, but there is no working suspect theory that he is aware of. Brian Entin's anonymous source inside the department told him there is no direct suspect right now and no name on the table. And this source said something that has stayed with me. Quote, "Not with how the investigation has gone so far." End quote. No suspect. Not with how the investigation has gone. This source was not saying the case is impossible to solve. They were saying the early failures made it far harder than it should have been. And think about who is responsible for those early failures. One man, Chris Nanos, the man who put a friend with no homicide experience in charge of the homicide unit. The man whose department ran the first week like, in the exact words of his own sergeant, a mess. The man whose investigators went back to Nancy's home multiple times because they failed to collect evidence properly the first time. The man who sent the DNA to Florida instead of putting it on an FBI plane. The man who kept the director of the FBI out of this investigation for 4 critical days. The man who, when his own board demanded answers under oath, sent a lawyer instead. The man who has been suspended 8 times. The man who beat a handcuffed person to the point of intensive care. The man who lied on his resume for 40 years. The man who sat under oath in December of 2025 and said he had never been suspended. People across America have been saying it online, on X.com, in comment sections, in letters to local officials. They have been saying what they think of Chris Nanos and what they believe should happen to him. And while we are not going to repeat the exact language some of those people used, we understand the anger completely. Because here is the reality. An 84-year-old woman is still missing. She has a pacemaker. She depends on daily medication. She is someone's mother. She is Savannah Guthrie's mother, and Savannah has had to step away from her anchor desk multiple times during this investigation to deal with the weight of what her family is going through. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st, 2026. The man responsible for finding her has spent this entire time fighting the FBI, hiding from his own supervisors, lying under oath, and presiding over an investigation his own deputies describe with a single word: a mess. Kash Patel said it on national television. He said, "We were kept out for 4 days." He said, "The first 48 hours are the most critical." He said he had the agents, he had the plane, he had the lab, and he was told no. Sergeant Aaron Cross said what he believed should have happened the moment that surveillance image of the perpetrator was released. He said the case should have been handed to the FBI completely. He said the sheriff would never do that. And he said why. Because the size of this man's ego is difficult to describe. Dr. Matt Hines of the Pima County Board of Supervisors called Nanos a public safety threat. His own deputies gave him a unanimous no-confidence vote. His own sergeant called the first week of the investigation a mess. And the FBI director of the United States went on national television and told the American public that for 4 days his agency was kept out. This is not a political story. This is not about Democrats or Republicans. This is about a missing woman. This is about an 84-year-old grandmother who needs medication and has been gone since February. This is about what happens when one man's ego is placed above the safety of a human being. And it is about accountability. The Board of Supervisors has started the process. The Deputies' Union has asked for a felony investigation. The FBI director has spoken publicly. The public record is clear. What comes next, whether that is resignation, removal, or something more, is now in the hands of the people and the institutions that are supposed to keep powerful people accountable. We will be watching, and we will be here when the next development breaks. If this video gave you something you could not get anywhere else, then Brian Records has done its job. This channel was built to say the things that others will not say. We are not finished with this story. We are not moving on while Nancy is still missing. Every verified fact, every confirmed quote, every source used in this video is in the description. Check it, share it. And if you believe that truth matters, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because this case is not over, and neither are we. Because this case is not over, and neither are we.
This house is sure gone crazy.